Give me a moment, peoples. So while we do that, so we were talking about this idea that that there's the that there's the big things and the small things. So the big things are the things found in the Torah. The small things are the details. Of all the rabbinic interpretation, and particularly the rabbinic rulers. We spoke about that extensively yesterday, and we'll certainly go from there. Um, I'm just in the process of putting this up. So now it is on the Shul's page, and that's good. So this idea so I want to dwell on something that some of you were a little bit exercised about yesterday, which is the idea that those who transgress the words of the sages are chayav mita, a liable death penalty. Obviously, not the death penalty. It means to say that it's a process, in essence, of harming oneself, because one's Judaism dies as if it were. I also wanted to share a very interesting anecdote that's been circulating on the internet about righteous people and their honesty. So, as you know, yesterday, does anyone remember which great rabbi's yahrzeit was yesterday? I mentioned this. Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, is the founder of Torah and Derech Eretz, Torah with combining Torah and the modern secular knowledge. He was the founder of what we ultimately call modern or centrist orthodoxy. He 9 families, the whole Frankfurt, a huge Jewish community, had all become reformed, and 9 families invited him to start a Orthodox community. In 30 years, the community had completely collapsed. And when he passed away, there were hundreds and hundreds of families in his community, and this community continued all the way to the Holocaust, and its survivors continue to this day in Washington Heights, New York, and many other places. And his influence on Torah and understanding Torah and being able to that Judaism stand without compromise, with using the knowledge of the world in a positive way, is something that his influence continues tremendously. So this interesting anecdote, which I thought was worth sharing, because the Talmud, the Talmud is often discussing the stories of the sages and their honesty and so on. And I really wanted to share with you. So when he wrote his will, he passed away relatively young, I think late 60s. So he wrote his will relatively early. And when he wrote his will, he told his family that they should pay back the community anything left of his salary over a 3-month period. So if he were to die 1 month into the quarter, they should return the 2 months. Apparently, the community paid his salary quarterly in advance. So it happened that he passed away exactly at the end of the quarter. So they didn't have to return anything. So he was honest till his very last moment, and I thought that was a very interesting thing. It's been circulating all over the internet.
It is.
So that's the story. So with that, we're now going to turn back to Eruvin and continue our journey. So again, why, if the rabbinic interpretations and rabbinic decrees are so important, why is it that we didn't write it down? So I made a joke about Hagba yesterday, but the truth is the Torah is constantly growing, constantly evolving, and I use the word evolving in the sense that it remains what it is, but it's constantly growing, and therefore it would be impossible to write it all down. More than that, I thought of something else too, something very interesting in that context. So not only that, let us say, so for example, where the halacha says that you can't end someone's life early to harvest their organs. So if someone is about to die but isn't dead yet, you can't send them on their way in order to use their organs, even though fresh organs are better. Now in China, it's well known that the government has been executing prisoners by sedating them and taking out the organs while they're still alive, thereby making them very fresh and selling them on the black market, in Asia for huge amounts of money. This is something that even the Economist reported on. PBS, which is usually reluctant to say bad things about China, reported on this. So this is halacha. You can't kill people in order to take the organs, even if they were very sick. And this is one of the issues, that the debate about brain death and so on in halacha. But my point is, and Maimonides alludes to this very generally, saying that you can't save your life by killing someone else. You can't heal yourself. To save your life, killing someone else. You can't heal yourself. Self-defense, we're not talking about. You can't heal yourself, he says, by killing someone else. So, but in general, this halacha only became to be discussed in the last 60 years when organ transplant became a thing. So my point is, let us say the Torah would say, thou shalt not kill someone to transplant their organs. No one will know what you're talking about because the technology is 3,000 years in the future. Let us say the Torah says you shall not illegally harvest metadata to find out secrets about people. That's halacha. It goes into the laws of the prohibition of invading people's privacy, hezekriya. But if you would write it in the Torah, no one would know what you're talking about. And by the same token, if the Torah, why does it say do not cook a kid in your mother's milk? So the Ibn Ezra says that because that's what they used to do. Young goats have a very gamey flavor, and one of the ways to get rid of that flavor is to cook it in milk, which takes away the sharpness from the meat. So since male goats are not as demand as female goats, they don't give milk, and you only need so many male goats to father babies. So baby goats. So the rule was shepherds used to get a certain amount of baby male goats that they were allowed to eat. That was part of their fringe benefits of their job. So it was customary, says the Ibn Ezra, and he says the Arabs still do this in his country. It's customary to cook a kid in the milk, usually of the mother goat, in order to make the baby goat tastier. In other words, the Torah prohibits all milk and meat, but it gives us an example of the kid in the mother's milk. Why? So if the Torah was given today, what would it say? No guess. What would the Torah say if it wanted to give an example of a classic food that everyone eats that's milk and meat together?
Cheeseburger.
Exactly. If the Torah was given today, it would say, thou shalt not eat a cheeseburger. And we'd understand that it means all milk and meat by the rabbinic tradition. Point being, when the Torah was given then, it said cheeseburger, no one know what a cheeseburger is because cheeseburgers were thousands of years in the future. The person, it wasn't the Earl of Sandwich who invented the sandwich, it was Hillel with Korech. But nevertheless, this is all thousands of years in the future. So part of the point is why many of the rabbinic interpretations and rulings and decrees are not brought in the Torah, even though because God's will is that we follow what the sages say. They're every bit as important as the laws that Hashem gave us directly in the Torah. But we wouldn't know what they are. We wouldn't know their relevance. A lot of rabbinic decrees relate to Galut, relate to the situation of exile. And therefore they were not put in the Torah. And besides the Akbar problem, they wouldn't have any meaning to us until later. By the same token, Maimonides makes a very interesting point. Maimonides makes a very beautiful point in his discussion about sacrifices that me and Joe studied with. What was his name, that big professor from Israel?
Oh,
we went
Micha
together
Goodman.
to New York.
Micha Goodman.
Micha Goodman. Yeah, he's a relative of Dr. Eisenstein's. And me and Joe had a great... Anyways, so we're discussing this, and Maimonides makes the point there that many things, like, for example, the Torah only begins to talk about life after death and Tchiyat HaMeisim, resurrection of the dead, much later. The Torah only begins to talk about God in theological terms later in the Tanakh, the later prophets. And it permits sacrifices everywhere, then it limits it only to the temple. So Maimonides says that the people when they left Egypt, that very basic understanding of God and of where the Torah is going, and we never download ideas into people. People have to develop the ideas, they have to grow, they have to mature. So the Rambam says you see that the sophistication of the ideas in the Tanakh grows as time goes on. In other words, people need to be ready. And there are many things that the sages instituted that are good things that the people weren't ready for in their early immaturity. So for all these reasons, this is what the Gemara means. So this little piece of Eruvin that we studied is actually extraordinarily important. Let me see what is actually right. Yeah. So Mark says the zooming in on Shabbat. That's true, but that's already dealt with. You can't use electronic devices on Shabbat except for health purposes. And by the same token, unfortunately, because I'd love to have Baruch Hu Kedusha Shots and Torah reading on Zoom, it's established. The issue's been discussed at great length, and it's quite clear that one, you can't use electronic devices on Shabbat except in a healthcare setting, and number two, it's also established that you need 10 people in a physical space. And a lot of people, even though they're constantly connected with Zoom and so on, it's not the same. We are physical beings and we live a physical life, and and as a grandfather, I can tell you that we see the grandkids, the California grandkids, Kanai Nahara, we see them on Zoom almost on the phone, almost on WhatsApp, almost every day, but it's not the same. It's not the same, it's not the same as as giving them a hug or playing ball with them and so on in real life. So,
Rabbi, I would like to ask you a question.
1 minute. So it's the same with the minion. So that's in response to Mark's question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so back to the rabbi that explained, even in his own day, the shepherds were still cooking their goat meat in milk, right?
Right.
To soften it up. So he explained that there was a reason why they did it. The question is, why does the Torah prohibit it? Why does the Torah say lo tevashel?
Why does the Torah say lo tevashel?
Right.
So the answer is that the laws of kosher are a chok. They're a law without a particular logical social structure meaning, but they have meaning in the eyes of God. And I could explain it, but we're gonna get to the question of milk and meat when we get to chulin. So we'll discuss it. It's a good question, Joe. It relates to the concept of the chok, of the law without a driving natural law reason. But let's leave it for now because that'll take us in a certain direction.
Okay.
But the question of the chok is a separate question from what we're discussing here. It's a good one, and we'll revisit it. And Maimonides Maimonides claims a rational idea for almost all chukim, but this is another topic, and we'll get there. But let's go back to the Gemara and Eruvin, and I can assure you that this very issue you raised, Joe, will come up in the Talmud multiple times, and we will address it then. Okay, because this class only has limited time, so we have to be somewhat limited. Here, let me find this. Okay, and we're gonna find history, and we're gonna find my Eruvin. Okay, there we are. Bonk. And sharing the screen. Okay, I'm getting good at this, sort of. Okay. And again, the questions about COVID and Zoom and so on, they're good questions, and about mental health, and should be addressed on their own, just like the question of the kid and its mother's milk. Okay, so let's go down here. Okay, now. Okay, Velag Harbe Yigias Basar. Now, this is far out. This is really far out. And much study is a wariness of the flesh. So instead of Hag, study. So the Kohelet, Ecclesiastes says there's no end to writing books, and much of their study is a wariness of the flesh. Those people of them are baloney. Okay, that's, or there's a lot of baloney out there. That's the meaning. With the deeper meaning, we said, no, that the words of the Sofrim, there's no end. It's a good thing. There's no end to all the wonderful books we can write of Torah. But the lahag here, the Talmud wants to interpretate, not studying, higayon, but la'ag. Now, here's something to understand about the way the Talmud does word switches. So a lot of Aggadot, a lot of Medrash involves changing one letter to another. So there is a principle in biblical exegesis, especially Aggadic, Midrashic exegesis, that all words that come from one motza'ah, from one set of, it means a place in the body. As you know, there are 5 motza'ot. There's the words that come from the teeth, Daled Lamed Nun Tes. There's letters that come from the breath. There are letters that come from the throat. There are letters that come from the tongue, the linguals, right? Like Lamed comes from the tongue. So the gutturals that come from the throat are Aleph, Hey, Chet, Ayin. Now, the reason is because Ashkenazim, like us, don't pronounce those letters properly. The correct pronunciation is Aleph, that's a breath. Hey, that's a breath from the throat. Het is supposed to not go ch, that's a chuf. It's supposed to come from the throat. Huh. So het, not het. And ayin is a glottal stop. Ayin. But that's how we got Yankov, because it's a leftover from when we pronounced it properly, like the Yemenites and Moroccan Jews do, which is so it's Yaakov. So that's still coming from the throat. So you can exchange any throat letter for any throat letter. That's a midrashic premise. So the hey is one of the gutturals, so you can exchange it for an ayin, la'ag. Okay, that's the correct way to pronounce it. So la'ag with an ayin means to mock. So we're exchanging the hey for an ayin. So Rav Papa, the son of Ravacha, the Svarada, says in the name of Ravacha Bar Ula, this teaches us that whoever mocks la'ag, the words of the sages, is judged with boiling excrement. Now, we need to understand this. This is a very far out statement. So, what does this mean? Certain other famous Jewish sinners, it says that in the world to come, they're judged in boiling excrement. Now, obviously, the world to come is not a physical place. And so what does this mean? So the Maharal of Prague, Rabbi Yehuda Levoi, the great mystic, astronomer, he was many great things. Supposedly he made the golem. It was a very, supposedly he left the golem in the attic of the Altnai Shul in Prague. So if you go to Prague today and take a tour of the Altnai Shul and you ask the Gabbai to see the golem, he'll pull a mirror out of his pocket and show you yourself. So, but at any rate, and the first computer in 1953, the Israelis put together their own vacuum tube computer. The first Israeli computer was called Golem 1, and then the next one was called Golem Bet, and so on, Golem Aleph, Golem Bet, because a computer does exactly what you tell it to and no more. But at any rate, my point being that the Maharal of Prague explains that obviously there's no physical space. So what does it mean, boiling excrement? What does this mean? Now, so we mentioned before, and again, Aggadot is sometimes very hidden and very esoteric, and certainly not meant to be taken literally. So the Maharal explains very beautifully as follows: that what does this mean? What does this concept mean? So we know that the purpose of the digestive system is to extract the nutrients and give them to the bloodstream, right? And then what's left over, the waste, because all food has waste, is driven out of the body, okay? We say a bracha when we go to the bathroom to appreciate the wonder of this system. And we all know that when the digestive system isn't working properly, it's from the more unpleasant things, even if it's not dangerous, right? Okay, don't have to dwell on it too much. But here's the point, that the digestive system drives out the waste and keeps the nutrients. So the Maral explains that the Torah, that when you read the written Torah, there are a lot of things that if you took them literally would be wrong, immoral, and dangerous. Furthermore, there's a lot of possible interpretations of the Torah, especially when it comes to halakha, to law, and many of those possible interpretations are plain wrong. So the person who criticizes the words of the sages, who mocks the words of the sages, who finds their interpretations silly and says, come on, and all that sort of thing, this person loses the ability. They lose the ability to differentiate between the good ideas that are nutrients that make us better Jews and better people, and the false and bad interpretations that are poisonous and destructive, like what happens, God forbid, if the waste remains in the body or leaks out into the rest of the body. So, in other words, the person who mocks the system of dividing the true from the false, which is the words of the sages, is where they're stuck. They're stuck, well, in deep, you know what, because they're rejecting the ability to separate the waste from the good. So in the next world where we experience whatever we did spiritually, they experience this reveling and this soaking in the waste rather than in the good and in the truth. So this is the meaning. So this seems a far out, bathroom humor idea, but it isn't. The Maral explains that what we're saying here is that the person who rejects the ability to define what the Torah really wants to say from false, dangerous, and poisonous interpretations, in the next world, they're going to experience the rubbish they created, the spiritual rubbish they created for themselves.
But that, Rabbi, he would have made their point without the last word. I mean...
Hey, Joe, it's the shock factor again. That's exactly the point. We want to shock you. The reason they say it is exactly the point. We want to shock you. We want to tell you what deep you know what you're in if you reject the words of the sages and try to go off and make your own interpretations.
Exactly.
This is shock value. That's the point.
Yeah.
Well, shocked me, I guess. That's okay.
Exactly. You also,
that's proof.
So you see, reaching out over the millennia, the sages accomplished exactly what they wanted to.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Talmud says things like it is. The Talmud discusses a lot of things very explicitly. It's not shy. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Where does the metaphor of the weariness of the flesh come from? Aggadot? Or
no,
another?
That's in a Kohelet. But the idea Giyat Batar, the weariness of the flesh, means to say the wearing away of the flesh, as if it were the metaphorical flesh is worn away by this severe punishment. And again, it's not a punishment. The important thing to remember, the whole concept of the world to come in Judaism is that a person, in other words, in this world, the spiritual consequences of what we do are hidden from us, or we'd have no free will. In other words, if every time you sinned, a lightning bolt hit you, and every time you did a mitzvah, you won the lottery, there'd be no free will. So the consequences are hidden from us. In the next world, we experience the spiritual world we created for ourselves. That, by the way, is the piece in Tractate Shabbat about the two angels who come home with you Friday night. We ended up not doing that. I'll go back to it at some point. But that's the idea. That we create a spiritual atmosphere, we create a spiritual world that we experience in the next one.
But the consequences of old age, we all experience, we all know about.
Yeah, but it's not, but in the next world, after 240, Yossel, due to inflation, we doubled the wish. In the next world, after 240, you really experience it.
Oh, well, that's true. I'm sure. Well,
Maskif le Rava.
But that's not a secret in our own life.
Now, Rava
Oh,
asks a question. Rava does not like the letter
240.
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us move on. Maskef la Rava. Rava raised a question, a challenge, because Rava doesn't like the letter substitution. Miktiv lahag. It's not written lahag. Lahagsiv. It's written to meditate. Elakola hogu behem toim tambasar means to say whoever properly meditates. The Rava doesn't like this far out system of interpretation. He likes reading it literally, but actually, instead of it being a punishment, it means to say that Yagiat Basar, that the effort in studying the Torah brings about as if you taste the taste of meat, which means to say that that a good piece of Talmud, when you understand it, the joy of learning Torah is better than the finest steak. In other words, just the simple joy. And if you've watched people study, you know this. Okay.
Rabbi, do you know that letter substituting sounds to me like the beginning of coding, of code writing?
Well, more than that, I will tell you that sometimes the Aggadot says things, especially like about the Romans and the like.
Yeah.
It uses exactly that. It says things, and if you do letter substitutions, you see who it's talking about. Yes, and there are examples. By the way, some apparently, the Michtevei Lachish, the famous letters from Lachish when it was besieged by the Assyrians. Some of the oldest, Hebrew letter writing, very famous archaeological thing, letters of Lachish.
Yeah.
I think they were written on potsherds anyway, so I think some of those letters are written in code. And that goes back to the first temple. Okay.
There is the reason I'm bringing it up, there's a great public television, there's a great program about coding by a woman, I don't remember her first name or last name. She changed her last name to Friedman because she married Friedman, but she was actually she was a Christian. Okay, let's put it this way. So that's okay.
Yeah. Anyways, so tomorrow not tomorrow, but Thursday, we're gonna study a very famous story about Rabbi Akiva and his spiritual heroism. But for now, I will wish you a good day and encourage you to join us for our 15-minute quickie lunch and learn. Grab a sandwich and a few minutes of Torah.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so there is a class on Wednesday?
No. Starting in February, we're not going to have Monday and we're going to have Wednesdays.
I see.
And then we're going to switch. I switch it out every month for reasons that I've explained, have to do with my kosher work. But for January, it's no class Wednesday, and February no class Monday, March no class Wednesday, etc. Okay,
Rabbi,
so that way no one will get confused.
Thank you.
Rabbi, did you send that?
No, I
link?
didn't. I got involved with this whole Chevra Kadisha problem last night.
Okay,
I will do it. I will do it Billy Neder before noon today. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Billy Nader, who's Ralph's
Okay.
brother. Okay.
I'm gonna take it to the bank.
Well, hopefully that's why I said Billy Neder without an oath,
Without Neder, right?
Because as a rabbi, I literally don't know what's going to happen the moment we finish this class. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Join the crowd.
All the best.